There's a cave on the northern shore of Lake Superior that doesn't appear on any map printed after 1962. I know because I've looked. I've looked through every survey, every geological report, every NPS document I could get my hands on. And that cave, the one I walked into, the one I found her in, the one where something was moving through the water behind me, that cave doesn't exist. Not officially. Not anymore. But the bodies keep showing up in it. 3 of them in 2 weeks. All in the same position. All in the same shallow water at the entrance. And the last one looked at me. I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I've pulled drowning victims out of the lake. I've carried hikers off cliffs. I've filed hundreds of incident reports, each one the same form, same boxes, same language. But I have never, in 12 years, filed a report for something that doesn't have a name. Something that the people above me already knew about and chose to keep in a locked drawer. My name is Marcus Webb. I was a ranger at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore on the southern shore of Lake Superior. I say was because I don't work there anymore. I transferred out. I'm in Arizona now, 1,000 miles from the nearest body of open water, and I still wake up at 2 in the morning thinking about what I saw in that cave. What I heard. And what I left behind. This is what happened. Before we begin, I'd be thrilled if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and hit on the notification bell. It helps me continue sharing my experiences from places most people never see. And if you've had a strange experience in the wild, write it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. The first body turned up on a Tuesday in early October. I know it was a Tuesday because I just finished my weekly equipment check that morning. Flashlight, batteries, first aid kit, the radio that cuts out every time weather rolls in off the lake, which is often, because weather is always rolling in off the lake. I'd logged everything, initialed the sheet, and headed out for a routine shoreline patrol east of Ridgeline Beach. I need to explain something about that stretch of shoreline so you understand what I'm describing. The sandstone cliffs along Pictured Rocks run for miles. They're beautiful in the way that things which can kill you are sometimes beautiful. Tall, layered in iron reds and copper greens, carved by water into arches and columns and caves. Tourists take pictures of them from kayaks. They look stable. They are not stable. The rock erodes constantly. Pieces of it fall. The lake eats at the base. The caves shift and change shape over decades, and no 2 winters leave them exactly the same. The cave near Ridgeline Beach was one I'd been past hundreds of times. It sat about 40 feet from the waterline at normal levels, a wide mouth in the cliff face with a shallow pool at the entrance that filled and drained with the waves. Nothing remarkable about it. I'd never had a reason to go inside. I found him wedged into the entrance, face down, waterlogged in the way that tells you it's been a while. The skin had that particular look, tight and pale and not quite the right color. The lake does that. Superior is cold enough that bodies don't decompose the way they do in warmer water. They just change. Slowly. Into something that looks less and less like a person and more like a thing the water made. I've been working this lakeshore for 12 years. Before that, I did 4 years at a state park downstate, mostly campground management and trail work. I came up here because I wanted something wilder, something that felt real. Superior felt real. It still does. That's part of the problem. I called it in, secured the area as best I could alone, and waited for county to show up. That's the job. You find the thing, you call it in, you wait. Dr. Sandra Voss drove up from Marquette. She's the county medical examiner, handles anything that comes out of the lake in this jurisdiction. I'd worked with her 3 or 4 times before. She's efficient in a way that borders on clinical, doesn't really invite small talk, doesn't seem to need it. She looked at the body for about 20 minutes. Crouched down, moved some things around with gloved hands, took notes on a clipboard she'd brought from her car. She asked me 2 questions, when I'd found it and whether I'd moved it. Then she told me it was a drowning and that she'd have paperwork to me by end of week. Standard. Happens more than people think out here. I filed my incident report that afternoon. Closed case. I moved on. 2 weeks later, I found another one. Same cave. Same position. Face down in the shallows, Just inside the entrance, arms loose at the sides. Different person, younger I thought, though it was getting harder to tell. The lake had done its work on this one too, maybe a little more aggressively. The water was colder now. Mid-October. I called it in. Voss came back up from Marquette. She ruled it a drowning again. Same 2 questions, same clinical efficiency. She didn't mention the first body, and I didn't bring it up. But I noticed that she spent a few extra seconds looking at the cave entrance before she walked back to her car. Just standing there, clipboard against her chest, looking at the rock. That one bothered me. I'll admit that. Same cave, twice in 2 weeks. It's a coincidence, but it's not impossible. That stretch of shoreline has a particular current pattern that funnels debris, driftwood, and sometimes people into the cave entrance. I knew that from 12 years of watching the water move. I'd pulled logs out of there. I'd found a kayak paddle lodged in the shallows once. Things collect there. That's what it does. I wrote it up in my report. Noted the location pattern, suggested we flag the cave for seasonal warning signage, maybe a buoy line during the tourist months. Helen Caldwell, my supervisor at the Ashford station, acknowledged the report and said she'd look into the signage request. That was her way. Helen acknowledged things. She didn't rush. I filed it and moved on again. The third one was on a Thursday morning. Overcast, temperature around 38 degrees. I remember the cold specifically because I grabbed my heavier patrol jacket that day, the insulated one I usually don't pull out until November. There's a particular kind of damp cold that comes off the lake in early October that gets into your hands faster than actual winter cold does. It's wet. It finds the gaps in your gloves, the seam at the wrist, the space between your collar and your neck. I was wearing my thicker gloves that morning. That detail matters later. I wasn't even doing a targeted patrol of that area. I'd had a report of kayakers in a restricted stretch a half-mile to the east, and my route back to the trailhead took me past the cave. I almost didn't look. I had the kayaker situation in my head, and I was already composing the radio call I'd have to make about it. But you develop habits in this work. You look at the water. You scan the cave entrances. You check. It's automatic, the way you check your mirrors when you drive. Your eyes just go there. He was face down in the shallows at the cave entrance. Maybe 10 inches of water, shallow enough that most of his body was above the surface. Same general position as the other 2. Arms loose, head turned slightly to one side. I stopped. I stood there on the wet rock for probably 10 seconds, just looking at him. I was already running through the sequence in my head. Call it in. Secure the area. Wait for Voss. I'd done this twice already. The motions were familiar. I pulled out my radio. Then I stopped myself. I needed to check for a pulse first. That's protocol. You don't assume. Even when the body looks like it's been in the water for days, you check. You reach down, find the wrist or the neck, and you confirm. I waded in. The water was cold enough that I felt it through my boots immediately, a sharp biting cold that climbed up past my ankles and settled into my shins. I got close. Crouched down. Reached for his wrist with my gloved hand. He rolled over. Not like the water moved him. Not like my reaching disturbed his balance or shifted the current beneath him. He rolled over on his own. One smooth, deliberate motion, like someone turning in their sleep, and suddenly I was looking at his face. I don't know how to write this part properly. I've tried a few different ways and none of them capture it right. There are things your brain sees that it processes before your conscious mind catches up, and by the time you realize what's wrong, your body has already started reacting. His eyes were open. They were too large. Not dramatically, not like something from a movie, just slightly too large for his face in a way that made everything else about his features look off. Like someone had taken a normal human face and adjusted one setting by a fraction. Your brain registers it before you can explain why it's wrong. And they were filmed over. Both of them. Completely white. No iris, no pupil, nothing. Like a membrane had grown across them, smooth and opaque, the color of old milk. His hands were wrong too. I noticed that next because one of them was close to me, almost touching my boot. His fingers had fused together. Not webbed, not like a birth defect or a genetic condition. Fused. Solid. Like the individual fingers had merged into a single smooth mass on each hand. The skin was continuous across them, pale and tight, with no wrinkles, no knuckles, no joints visible. Just two solid shapes where hands should have been. And there was a sound coming from him. Wet and rhythmic, rising from somewhere in his chest or his throat. I couldn't tell which. It wasn't breathing. I know what breathing sounds like: labored breathing, shallow breathing, the wet rattle of fluid in the lungs. I've heard all of it. This wasn't any of it. This was something else. A low, pulsing sound, like something contracting and expanding deep inside him. It was regular, though. Whatever it was, it had a rhythm. A pattern. Like a heartbeat, but slower and wrong. I stood up. I took 2 steps backward. The water was at my shins and I couldn't feel my feet anymore, and I was looking at him looking at me with those white filmed-over eyes, and the sound kept coming, steady, rhythmic, patient. And I thought very clearly, I should not be here. That thought didn't come with panic. It came with certainty. The same kind of certainty you feel when you step too close to a cliff edge and your body tells you to move back before your brain finishes the calculation. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition. Something very old and very deep inside me recognized what I was looking at, even though I had no name for it, and it told me to leave. So I left. I turned around and walked out of the water. And then I was on the rock shelf. And then I was on the trail. And then I was moving faster than I normally move. I didn't run. Not exactly. I just moved with a great deal of intention in the direction of away. The trail back to the trailhead is about 1.25 miles. I did it in considerably less time than usual. The sound stayed with me, that wet, rhythmic pulse. I kept expecting to hear it behind me, following me up the trail, getting closer. I never did. Which was almost worse, because the silence where I expected the sound made me imagine it everywhere. I got back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat. My hands were shaking slightly, which I noticed the way you notice a low tire, something to address, not something to panic about. I'd carried my radio in my hand the entire way back without calling anything in. I was still holding it, white-knuckled, the antenna pressing into my palm. I sat there for a minute. The lake was flat and gray through the windshield. No wind. The kind of quiet where it feels like the weather is deciding something, making up its mind. I started the truck and drove back toward Ashford. The Ashford Ranger Station is a squat brown building off Main Street with a parking lot that needs repaving and a bulletin board inside the front door that's been showing the same bare safety poster since I started there 12 years ago. Somebody laminated it at some point, which I think is the only reason it survived. I pulled in around 10:30. The lot was mostly empty. Helen's truck was there, the green Silverado with the dent in the rear quarter panel she'd never gotten fixed. I sat in mine for a second, looking at the building. Then I went in. She was at her desk in the back office, going through something on her computer. Helen Caldwell had been at the Ashford station for longer than anyone else. 31 years by the time I got there. She was in her early 60s, wiry, sun-weathered in a way that makes a person look carved rather than old. She'd raised 2 kids as a single parent while running the station, and she managed both with the same quiet, immovable patience. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She looked up when I came in. I probably looked rough. I hadn't checked a mirror. "Marcus," she said. "I need to report something," I said. "That's what I'm here for." She closed whatever she had open on her screen and pointed at the chair across from her desk. I sat. She folded her hands on the desk and waited. That was Helen's thing. She never prompted you. She just waited in silence until you talked. It was remarkably effective. I talked. I told her about the cave, the body face down in the shallows, how I'd reached for the pulse check and it had rolled over on its own. The eyes. The hands. The sound it was making. I kept it factual and in order, the way you're trained to deliver a verbal report. Clear, sequential, unemotional. And I watched her face while I did it. That's the part one keep coming back to. I watched her face. And nothing happened on it. Not the usual things people do when you tell them something disturbing. No slight widening of the eyes, no tightening of the jaw, no carefully controlled neutral expression, which is actually its own tell because a person who's working to stay neutral looks different from a person who simply isn't surprised. Helen just listened. Like I was telling her about a downed tree on the trail. Like what I was describing fit into a category she already had. I finished. She nodded once. "When did this happen?" she said. "This morning. Around 7:45. She nodded again. Then she stood up and walked to the filing cabinet in the corner, the old one gray metal for drawers, with a lock on the top drawer that I'd never seen her open. She pulled a key from her lanyard, unlocked it, and took out a manila folder. It was thick. Thick enough that the edges had gone soft from years of handling. She walked it back and set it on the desk in front of me. "Take a look," she said. I opened it. The top photograph was printed on old paper, the kind that's gone slightly yellow and has that particular smell, bookstores, basements time. Black and white. It showed the cave entrance at Ridgeline Beach. I recognized the rock formation immediately, that specific angle of the overhang, the way the sandstone curves inward on the left side. And in the shallows, face down, a body. Male, it looked like, from the build. Waterlogged. The photograph was dated in the margin in faded pencil. October 1983. I kept going through the folder. There were maybe 20 photographs total, spanning different years. 1983, 1987, 1991, 1994, then a gap, then two from 2008, then one from 2011. The more recent ones were on standard photo paper color, probably printed from a digital file. Same cave. Same shallows. Different bodies, but the same conditions every time. The same position. Face down. Arms loose. A couple of the photographs showed the hands close up. That fused, solid look. I recognized it immediately. My stomach turned, and I set those photographs to the side. There were written reports in the folder too. Incident reports, typed on actual typewriter paper for the older ones, that slightly uneven print where the ribbon was wearing thin. They described what I described. The eyes, the hands, the sound. A few of them used the word anomalous. One from 1991, written by a ranger named D. Kowalski, said, the subject appeared to exhibit autonomous movement, and he'd put a question mark after it. Like he wasn't sure if he should include that in an official document. Like he'd written something down that he knew was true and then immediately doubted himself for writing it. I understood that impulse completely. I sat there going through the folder for probably 5 minutes. Helen stood by the window and looked out at the parking lot and let me read. When I got to the bottom of the stack, I found the note. It was a half sheet of plain white paper, clipped to the inside front cover, handwritten in black ink. Block letters, neat and deliberate, like someone who had learned to print carefully a long time ago and never stopped. 1 line. 7 words. Do not return to the site alone. No signature. No date. No explanation. Just the one instruction. I looked up at Helen. She was still at the window. How long have you had this? I said. It was here when I took the station, she said. I added to it. The 2008 photos? And the 94. And the 2011. So she'd been collecting. Filing. Locking the drawer and going about her work. The note. I said. Already there when I found the folder. I looked back down at it. The handwriting matched the marginal notes in one of the oldest typed reports, not typed, handwritten in the same careful block print. I couldn't tell if it was the same person. Could have been. 40 years is a long time to keep a single instruction consistent. What is it? I said. She looked at me then. Full eye contact, which Helen didn't do casually. She was deliberate about it. I don't know, she said. And I believed her. Which was its own kind of problem. Because if she'd known, I could have been angry. I could have demanded answers. But she'd been sitting with the same unanswered question for over 30 years, and she didn't know either, and all she'd done was keep the folder locked and hope the pattern didn't repeat. She told me to take the rest of the day. File my incident report in the morning. Let her handle the notification to county. I said okay. I meant it when I said it. I drove home. My rental on Maple Street was a two-bedroom that I only used one bedroom of. Small kitchen, bad insulation, a landlord named Rick who kept promising to fix the bathroom vent fan and never did. I made a sandwich I didn't taste and sat at my kitchen table with the overhead light on and thought about that folder. The thing that kept snagging on me wasn't the photographs exactly. The photographs were terrible, but they were information. Information I could organize, cross-reference, think about systematically. What kept snagging was Helen's face when I told her. Or more precisely, what her face didn't do. Because that's not a reaction you can fake. The absence of surprise. You can fake calm. You can practice it. But you can't fake already knowing. She already knew. She'd known before I walked in. And she'd handed me a 40-year paper trail and a note telling me to stay away, and she'd offered exactly zero explanation for any of it. I'm not great at sitting with unanswered questions. That's probably my main professional liability, if I'm being honest. Helen knew that about me. She'd supervised me for 6 years. I thought about the note. Do not return to the site alone. Which is a very specific instruction. It doesn't say don't return. It says not alone. I didn't have anyone to bring. I thought about that for a while too. I thought about the body in the shallows and the way it had moved and the sound it made. That wet rhythmic pulse that wasn't breathing. I thought about 20 photographs spanning 40 years. I thought about the word anomalous with a question mark after it, written by someone who'd seen the same thing I saw and then had to figure out how to put it into bureaucratic language. I thought about Helen locking that drawer. By the time I went to bed, I'd already mostly decided. I wasn't going to bring anyone into that cave. That wasn't a thing I was willing to do, to take someone else and put them in front of whatever was in there. But I also wasn't going to sit in my rental on Maple Street and file a report and wait for Helen to handle it, whatever handling it meant. I'd been working this shoreline for 12 years. I knew that cave. I knew the approach, the tidal patterns, the way the light hit the entrance in the morning. I set my alarm for 5:45. The alarm went off at 5:45 and I was already awake. I'd been lying there for about 20 minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the heat kick on and off in the walls. The house made sounds at night, settling sounds, pipe sounds, the kinds of noises that you stop hearing after a few months of living somewhere. That morning, I heard all of them. I got up, made coffee in the drip machine on the counter, stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. Still dark out. The street was empty and the streetlight at the end of the block was doing that thing where it flickers once every few minutes, just enough to make the shadows shift. I drank the coffee standing up, rinsed the mug, put on my jacket. I drove out to Ridgeline Beach in my personal truck, not the patrol vehicle. I don't know exactly why. It felt like the right call. Like I didn't want this in a logbook. The parking area was empty. October on a Tuesday, that early, that cold, nobody out there. The wind had picked up overnight and the lake was moving, not rough, just restless, the surface flexing like something breathing underneath it. I grabbed my flashlight and my field kit from the back seat and walked the access path down to the waterline. The sandstone cliffs ran out to the east, pale orange in the early light, and I could see the cave entrance about 200 yards along the base. The water level was low. I walked the shoreline to the entrance without getting my boots wet, stepping carefully on the wet rock, watching my footing. I stood outside the cave for a moment. Not for any dramatic reason. I just wanted to look at it. Check the entrance, the shallows, anything that looked different from before. The water inside was clear and shallow and empty. No body. No movement. Just the cave floor, smooth sediment and darker rock, and the sound of water moving somewhere deeper inside. I went in. The main chamber was about 40 feet deep, the way I'd always known it. Sandstone walls, low ceiling toward the back, a couple of natural ledges where water pooled at high tide. I'd been in here probably a dozen times over the years. A kayaker got her boat wedged in here once. Took me and another ranger 40 minutes to work it free while she sat on a rock shelf and apologized repeatedly. I knew this space. The drag marks were on the floor near the back wall. 2 parallel lines in the sediment, spaced maybe 2 feet apart, running from the cave floor toward the left wall. Deep and clean, not blurred by water or time. Recent. And they went to the wall. Which didn't make sense, because the wall was solid rock. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. There was a gap in the back left corner, low to the ground where the wall met the floor. I'd never noticed it before, never had a reason to look that closely at that particular spot. It was maybe 4 feet high and 2 feet wide. The rock around its edges was darker than the surrounding sandstone, wet and worn smooth, like something had been moving through it regularly. Not a crack. An opening. A passage. I stood there for a minute. I thought about the note. Not alone. Then I got down on my hands and knees and went through. It opened up on the other side faster than I expected. I could stand within about 6 feet of the entrance. The passage ran back into the rock at a slight downward angle and curved to the left, and the floor was flat and wet and covered in the same fine sediment as the outer cave. The drag marks continued, 2 parallel lines disappearing into the darkness ahead. I followed them with my flashlight beam. The air changed almost immediately. The temperature dropped, not gradually, the way it does when you move deeper into a cave. It just fell, like stepping into a walk-in cooler. Like crossing a threshold. I could see my breath in the beam of the flashlight, thick and white, and the cold settled against my face and hands and found the gaps in my clothing with a precision that felt almost intentional. The walls were rough sandstone for the first 20 feet or so. Familiar texture. Normal rock. Then they changed. The formations started small. Just clusters near the base of the walls, low to the ground. I thought at first they were barnacles, which doesn't make geological sense this deep in the rock, but that's what they looked like. Dense, gray-white clusters, irregular and tightly packed, growing out of the sandstone like something that had been there for a very long time. I swept the flashlight across them. They moved. Not fast. Not dramatically. A slow, rhythmic pulse, like something breathing. One contraction, then stillness, then another contraction. In unison. All of them, pulsing together, on the same rhythm, like a single organism spread across the rock. I stood there and watched them for what felt like a long time. They didn't react to me. They didn't speed up or slow down. They just pulsed. Patient. Steady. Like they'd been doing it for years. Decades. Longer. I kept walking. The drag marks led me another 30 feet deeper into the passage. The formations covered more of the walls as I went, up past knee height, then waist height, then chest height, pulsing slow and steady in the flashlight beam. The sound of them was something I felt more than heard, a low subsonic vibration in my chest, in my teeth, like standing too close to a subwoofer. It was in the air. It was in the rock under my feet. I kept the light moving. Kept my eyes on the floor. Didn't touch anything. I almost missed her. She was against the right wall, in a section of the passage where the rock curved inward slightly, forming a shallow alcove. If I hadn't been sweeping the flashlight in a steady arc, I would have walked right past her. Helen Caldwell was sitting upright. Her back against the wall. Her legs straight out in front of her. Her hands folded in her lap, one over the other, the way you'd sit in a waiting room. She was wearing her field jacket. Her eyes were closed. I stopped. I stood there for a long time, 10 seconds, maybe more, just looking at her. The flashlight beam on her face. The formations pulsing slowly on the wall beside her, close enough that some of them were touching her jacket sleeve. Then I went over and crouched down and checked for a pulse. Even though I already knew. Her skin was cold. Not just cave cold. She'd been dead for a while. At least a day, probably more, based on the temperature in the passage and what I could see. I'm not a medical examiner. But I found enough bodies on this shoreline to know the difference between cold and gone. I sat back on my heels. She'd handed me that folder yesterday afternoon. She'd unlocked the drawer and pulled it out and told me not to go back alone. And then she'd come here. She'd come into this passage, past the formations, past the cold, and she'd sat down against this wall and folded her hands. And she'd died here. Had she come before she warned me? Or after? Did she give me the folder and then walk into the cave knowing she wasn't coming back? Or had she already been here, already done what she came to do, and the folder was her way of passing it on? I didn't know. I still don't. Either way, she'd known what she was walking into. And she'd done it anyway. She was sitting so upright. That was the thing that stayed with me. Hands folded. Back straight. Composed. I've seen drowning victims. I've seen fall victims. I've seen people who died in the cold. People don't end up like that on their own. Someone arranged her. Or she arranged herself. And I'm not sure which possibility is worse. I was still crouching there, flashlight in my hand, when I heard the water. The passage continued deeper behind me and to the left. Somewhere back there, the floor dipped and there was standing water. I'd registered it on my way in, a low ambient sound, water moving in a confined space, nothing alarming. But this was different. This was something moving through the water. A displacement sound. Slow and heavy and deliberate. Something large, shifting its weight, coming closer from the deeper part of the passage. And under it, barely audible, that sound. The wet rhythmic pulse. The one that wasn't breathing. I didn't look back. I want to be clear about that. I made a conscious, deliberate decision not to turn around. I don't know what was behind me. I don't know how close it was. I don't want to know. I stood up, kept my flashlight pointed forward, and walked back toward the entrance. Steady pace. Controlled. The cold pressed against my back as I moved, and the sound followed, not rushing, not chasing, just following, at a steady, patient distance. Like it knew where I was going. Like it wasn't in any hurry. I didn't run until I was back through the gap in the outer wall. And then I ran. I came out of the cave entrance into the gray morning light and kept moving until I was 50 feet up the beach. Then I stopped and bent over and put my hands on my knees and breathed. The air tasted like cold water and sand, and I stood there heaving, my breath coming in clouds, my hands shaking hard enough that I could see it. The lake was still flat. The beach was still empty. The sandstone cliffs ran out in both directions like nothing had happened. Like the world was exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. I straightened up and looked back at the cave entrance. Nothing came out of it. I stood there watching for a long time. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except the water. I walked back to my truck. My hands were steadier now, which surprised me. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes without starting the engine. The heater would have been nice, but I didn't move. I just sat there, staring through the windshield at the lake, thinking about Helen sitting upright in the dark with her hands folded. Thinking about the sound behind me. Thinking about the word dormant written in red pen in the margin of a photograph I hadn't found yet but somehow felt like I was building toward. I drove into town and went straight to Frank Tierney's office. Tierney was the county liaison, worked out of a small office above the hardware store on Front Street. The stairwell smelled like sawdust and oil, and his office smelled like old coffee and something vaguely floral, probably an air freshener that had long since lost the war against years of accumulated stale air. He had a ceramic dish of hard candy on the corner of his desk, the kind nobody actually eats. I sat down across from him and told him what I'd found. I kept it factual. I said I'd gone to the cave that morning. I said I'd found Helen Caldwell deceased, inside a passage that didn't appear on any current survey. I said the passage extended deeper than any known mapping of the cave. And I said there was something in there with her. Something in the water. Moving. I didn't try to describe it beyond that. I just said what I said and stopped. Tierney listened. He had his hands flat on the desk and he watched me the whole time, not writing anything down, not nodding. He had that particular stillness that some people get when they're not processing what you're saying so much as deciding what to do with it. How to categorize it. Where to file it. When I finished, he asked me one question. You sure she was dead? Yes. He nodded slowly. Then he picked up his desk phone and dialed a number from memory. That was it. No follow-up. No questions about the passage, about the formations, about what I meant by something in there. He just dialed. And then he turned his chair about 45 degrees away from me while it rang, like I wasn't sitting right there. I heard him say, "Yeah, it's Tierney. We've got a situation up at Pictured Rocks." A pause. The cave system. Yeah. Another pause, longer. Copy that. He hung up and turned back around. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. Someone will be in touch. Who? I said. Someone who handles this kind of thing. I didn't push it. Partly because Tierney had the particular energy of a man who had reached the exact limit of what he was willing to tell me. And partly because I was tired in a way that had settled into my bones somewhere around the time I'd found Helen and hadn't left since. I drove back to Maple Street. I sat on the couch and didn't turn on the TV or make food or do anything useful. I just sat there while the light in the windows changed from gray to dark. Then I went to bed. Someone was in touch the next morning. She was standing outside the ranger station at 8:15 when I pulled up. Dark coat, structured briefcase, hair pulled back tight. She looked like she'd gotten lost on the way to a corporate meeting in Chicago and hadn't adjusted her wardrobe or her expectations. The parking lot had a puddle the size of a kiddie pool from the overnight rain, and she was standing precisely 4 inches from its edge, like she'd calculated the exact safe distance. Catherine Holt, she said. Army Corps of Engineers. Government liaison. She shook my hand once, firm, brief. That was the introduction. We went inside and sat at the small table in the break room because my office had a broken chair I'd been meaning to replace for weeks. She set her briefcase on the table, but didn't open it. She had a legal pad and a pen, and she placed them both in front of her with the precision of someone setting up for an exam. Then she asked me about the cave. Not about Helen. Not about me. About the cave. She asked about the depth of the main passage, how far in I'd gone before I found the side opening, whether the floor was sediment or exposed rock, the approximate air temperature. I answered. She wrote things down in small, neat handwriting that I couldn't read upside down. Then she asked about the formations on the walls. I said they looked like barnacle clusters. She wrote that down without any change in her expression. I said they pulsed when my flashlight hit them. She wrote that down too. I watched her write it, and I felt something I couldn't quite name. It took me a few days to identify it. It was the feeling of saying something out loud that you're half hoping someone will challenge, will question, will push back on, and they don't. They just write it down. Which means they already knew. And they've been waiting for you to confirm what they already had in a file somewhere. She asked if the pulsing was rhythmic or irregular. I said rhythmic. She asked if I noticed any particular smell. I said just cold. Extreme cold, colder than it should have been at that depth. She nodded and wrote that down. She never asked me what I thought it was. She never asked if I was okay. When she was done with her questions, she set the pen down and opened the briefcase. She placed a document on the table, about 6 pages, stapled, neatly formatted. She slid it toward me. I picked it up and read it. The first page reclassified Helen Caldwell's death as a climbing accident. Accidental fall in a restricted, unstable area. The second page addressed the 3 bodies. All ruled consistent drownings, per the medical examiner's existing findings. The third page described a 60-day shoreline restriction along the Ridgeline Beach corridor while remediation crews conducted environmental work in the area. I read that word twice. Remediation. I put the document down. What does remediation mean? I said. We're going to seal the cave, she said. She said it the way you'd say we're going to repave the parking lot. Flat, practical, already decided before she walked in the door. Will that stop it? I said. She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. She reached across the table and picked up the document. She squared the pages against the tabletop, slid them back into the briefcase, and closed the latches. I need a signature if you're signing, she said. I'm not signing. She stood up, pushed the chair in, picked up her legal pad. Thank you for your time, Ranger Webb. That was it. She walked out of the break room, through the front door, and across the parking lot. I watched through the window as she navigated around the puddle on her way to a dark blue sedan parked at the far end of the lot. She put the briefcase in the back seat. She got in. She drove toward the highway. I stood at the window for a while after the car was gone. The parking lot was empty. The puddle was still there. I thought about her questions. The precise, specific, technical questions of someone who'd had this exact conversation before. Probably many times. In many places. And she'd arrived with the document already written. The narrative already decided. My signature was just paperwork. The operation was going to happen regardless. I thought about what sealing one entrance meant for a cave system that ran 2 miles under open water. 3 days later, I drove to Marquette. Northern Michigan University's library is about an hour south. I was there a little before noon. The building smelled like every academic library: old paper, carpet cleaner, recycled air, and the particular stillness of a place where people are trying to be quiet. I found a reference librarian at the desk. Older guy, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. I told him I was looking for geological survey records for the Pictured Rocks Formation, specifically anything predating current NPS documentation. He looked at me for a second, then said he'd check the archive catalog. I'm not a researcher. I know the park. I know the rock the way you know a road you've driven 10,000 times. But I don't have a geology degree. I figured I'd be in over my head quickly. I also figured it didn't matter, because I wasn't looking for technical data. I was looking for one specific thing, and I'd recognize it when I found it. The librarian came back with a cart. Survey records, bound reports, rolled map tubes in cardboard sleeves. He set me up at a long table near the window and told me the archive copies couldn't leave the building. I went through the newer material first. 1990s, 1980s, 1970s. Standard survey language, formation classifications, geological measurements. Nothing I didn't already know. The cave near Ridgeline Beach appeared on all of them, mapped the same way. Single access point, dead end at roughly 40 feet. The 1962 survey was in a bound report with a dark green cover, water-stained at the bottom corner. The paper inside was brittle and yellowed. It made a specific sound when I turned the pages, like something that hadn't been touched in a very long time reluctantly agreeing to be touched again. The maps in the 1962 survey were different. Same cave. Same location. But the passage didn't end at 40 feet. It continued. The survey team had mapped the full system, roughly 2 miles, running northeast under the lake bed. And along that 2-mile stretch, there were 7 marked access points. 7. The one I knew, and 6 others, distributed at intervals along the system, some of them well outside the park boundary, opening up somewhere beneath the open water of Lake Superior. None of those 6 additional points appeared in any survey after 1962. Not in the NPS maps, not in any later geological report, not in anything I'd seen in 12 years of working at the park. They were there in 62, documented and mapped, and then they were simply gone. Not disproven. Not reclassified. Erased. Someone had made a decision about what the maps would show, and that decision had held for over 60 years. I turned more pages. The photograph was near the back of the report, tucked between 2 pages of formation data. Black and white, slightly grainy. It showed a section of cave wall that I recognized, the texture of the sandstone, the way the formations clustered against it. The same formations I'd seen pulsing in my flashlight beam. Someone had circled them in red pen. The ink had faded to a rust color, but it was still clear. And in the margin, in small, neat handwriting, one word. Dormant. I read it several times. I was expecting something more. An explanation. A theory. A name. But it was just the one word, and it was enough. Dormant doesn't mean gone. It doesn't mean dead or neutralized or resolved. It means waiting. It means whatever conditions produced the active state weren't currently present, but the capacity remained. The word implies that those conditions could return. Whoever wrote that word in 1962 knew the difference between dormant and dead, and they chose the accurate one. That word was written 62 years ago. 62 years of dormant. And then 3 bodies in a sea cave in October. Something had changed. Something had woken up. I sat with that for a while. The library was quiet. Outside the window, the sky was gray and starting to look like snow. I thought about Holt's crews sealing one entrance. I thought about 6 other access points under the lake that she either didn't know about or had decided not to address. I thought about 2 miles of cave running beneath open water. I thought about what dormant meant for right now, about whether the word still applied, or whether the 3 bodies meant the timeline had shifted, and the thing in the margin was no longer a description but a memory. I took a photograph of the map with my phone. I took a photograph of the formations with the red circle and the word in the margin. Then I closed the report, returned everything to the cart, and told the librarian I was done. I got back to Ashford around 4. The station was quiet. End-of-day sounds, someone finishing paperwork, the radio doing its low background murmur. I went to the front desk. Nora was there, working through a stack of maintenance forms. She looked up when I came in. "I need to file a transfer request," I said. "Arizona. Southern District." She didn't ask why. She pulled up the form and started typing. Name, badge number, current station, requested station. She asked a few clarifying questions in that calm, even tone she always had. I answered. She typed. 10 minutes and it was done. She printed the confirmation, stamped it, slid it across the desk. I signed. She took it back and placed it in the outgoing tray. But when she handed me my copy, she looked at me for just a second. Not long. Not a look that said anything out loud. It was the look of someone who's been watching from a certain distance and understands more than they've been told. Like she'd seen the shape of what happened without needing the details. Like she was simply glad I was still standing in front of her desk. "Thanks, Nora," I said. "Safe travels," she said, and went back to her maintenance forms. I left with 11 days to spare. Didn't make a production of it. Packed my truck over 2 evenings, gear, clothes, a box of books I'd been meaning to read for 4 years. Left the furniture. It came with the rental, and it was staying with the rental. I did one last walkthrough. Checked the closets. Turned in my keys. The guy at the facilities desk didn't even look up. I drove out of Ashford on a Tuesday morning in the second week of November. The town was quiet the way small lake towns get in that dead space between fall tourists and winter snowmobilers. A few trucks at the gas station, a light on at the diner. I stopped for coffee and sat at the counter for 20 minutes, and nobody said anything to me, and I didn't say anything to anybody. I left a few dollars on the counter and walked out. I took the long way west. The road runs parallel to the lake for a good stretch, and I could see it through the trees when the tree line broke. Lake Superior in November is not a welcoming thing. It's flat and gray, and it looks like it weighs something. The color of old concrete. Something you could drown in without it noticing. I watched it through the passenger window when I could. And then it was behind the tree line, and that was it. I didn't stop at the shoreline. Didn't even consider it until I was past the turnoff, and then I thought about it for 30 seconds and let it go. The cave was behind me. That was the decision I'd made. I crossed into Wisconsin around noon. Crossed Minnesota by evening. Stopped at a motel that cost $62 and had a vending machine that only worked if you pressed the button twice. I ate gas station pretzels and watched half a nature documentary and went to sleep. I got to Arizona on a Friday afternoon. The change is always a little disorienting. You go from brown grass and flat highway to red rock and a sky that looks too wide, too open, like someone removed the ceiling. I'd forgotten how much of it there was. Miles and miles of dry, ancient, waterless land. The station outside of Sedona was smaller than Ashford. For rangers, a modest office, a maintenance shed. My new supervisor, Sullivan, was mid-40s, grew up in Phoenix. He shook my hand, showed me the supply room, gave me a binder with patrol routes. That was orientation. He didn't ask about Michigan. I didn't bring it up. My first incident report was a hiker with a twisted ankle on a Bell Rock trail. Standard. The same form. Name, date, nature of incident, actions taken, outcome. I filled it out, submitted it, and that was my first day of work in Arizona. I got a small rental in town. 1 bedroom, gas stove, a back porch facing west. The sunsets out here are the thing everyone talks about, and they're right. The sky goes orange and red in a way that's almost painful to look at, like the horizon is burning. I sat out there most evenings with whatever I was eating and watched it happen. It was good. It was fine. At night was different. Not every night. Maybe 3 or 4 times a week, I'd wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and lie there in the dark with the ceiling fan going and think about the cave. Not panicked. More like a problem I haven't solved. My brain keeps returning to it the way your tongue finds a cracked tooth. Involuntary. Compulsive. Just something it does. I think about the 1962 survey. The photograph with the red circle and the word in the margin. Dormant. I looked that word up, which I'm slightly embarrassed to admit because it's not a complicated word. But I wanted to be precise about what it meant. Present but not active. Alive but not doing anything. Not dead. Not gone. Waiting. That's the part that doesn't resolve. Holt's crews were going to seal the cave. One entrance. The one near Ridgeline Beach. The one I'd been in twice. I didn't sign the report that said Helen Caldwell fell. I drove west. The cave is behind me. All of that is true. But the 1962 survey showed 6 other access points. None of them in any current documentation. All of them somewhere along 2 miles of rock under open water. And whatever is in that cave system has been in there since at least 1962, probably much, much longer. And the word someone chose to describe it was dormant, which means it was different before. More active. And then it went quiet. And then 3 bodies turned up in the same cave in October, and one of them looked at me with eyes that weren't eyes anymore. I don't know what changed. I don't know what the cycle is, or if there is one. I don't know if Holt's people actually sealed the cave or just filed a report saying they did. I don't know what Helen knew that she didn't tell me. She had that folder for decades. She'd gone back to the cave before she warned me away, which means she understood something about what was down there. And she went anyway. And she sat down against that wall and folded her hands and waited. For what? I've spent more time than I should trying to understand what she was thinking. I keep coming up empty. Maybe she was trying to confirm something. Maybe she thought she could stop it. Maybe she needed to see it for herself one last time before she could tell me to stay away. Her family was told she fell. There was a service in Marquette in late November. I didn't go. I didn't think I should be there. I didn't think I could sit in a church and listen to someone describe a climbing accident and keep my face still. I didn't sign Holt's report. That part 1 held on to. It doesn't do anything practical. If I talked publicly about what happened, it would read as the account of a ranger who lost a colleague and had some kind of breakdown. I know that. I'm not naive about how this sounds. But I didn't sign. And that's the one thing I did that felt like mine. The work in Arizona is good. Sullivan's a decent supervisor. The trails are different out here, drier, more exposed, different hazards. I'm learning the terrain. I file my reports. I do my patrols. I eat dinner on the back porch and watch the sky burn red. Some days it feels normal. Some days I'm aware that I'm moving through the motions of a life that looks intact from the outside, and I'm not sure yet what it looks like from the inside. That's probably fine. I figure I'll give it more time. The 6 access points are still there. Wherever they open up beneath the lake bed, they're there. Rock doesn't care what we sealed. Water doesn't care about our paperwork. Whatever is in that cave has been there long enough that dormant was the word somebody reached for in 1962. Which means active was a word that applied to it once. And could again. I think about that at 2 in the morning. When the ceiling fan is turning slow above me and the desert is silent outside and there's no water for 1,000 miles. I'm alive. I'm employed. I'm doing the job. That's what I've got. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that cold, if you heard that sound, then I'd be thrilled if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and hit on the notification bell. It helps me continue sharing my experiences from places most people never see. And if you've had a strange experience in the wild, write it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Stay safe out there. And if you ever find yourself near a cave on a shoreline that looks like it doesn't belong on any map, keep walking.